Hi. George Packer is the author of The Unwinding, An Inner History of the New America, which just won the National Book Award for Nonfiction.
It did.
Welcome, George, and congratulations.
Thank you.
The Unwinding, An Inner History of the New America is almost an insanely ambitious book. Where did you get the conception of doing this book and doing it in the way that you did?
You know, in a way, my original conception was even more insanely ambitious, and I backed off it. I had just a sense in 2008 that many things were coming apart in the country. It was obvious: banks, automakers, housing, everything really. And I felt that it went back a long way. This was not just a cycle of a few years. There'd been trends going on throughout my adult life that I've been paying attention to, from deindustrialization, the rise of information technology, the polarization of politics, and mostly inequality between Americans. And I felt 2008 was sort of the crescendo of all those trends. And I wanted to both follow the fallout over the next few years, which I was able to do partly with the New Yorker magazine, and also to understand the forces and the currents that had driven us to that point. So that's a generation-long story. I originally thought of it as a more conventional history, where I would have to plow through some familiar turf, like the Reagan years, the Clinton years, the problems of newspapers, the cycles of recession. And it just, even telling it to you like that, you can see why I felt weary at the thought. So what I did instead was began to look for people in different parts of the country whose lives followed the trajectory of that chronology, from really the late 70s to the present. So they're all of a certain generational cohort, people born in the late 50s and 60s, and who lived in parts of the country that I could use to flesh out some of these themes. The Rust Belt, for example. There's a woman named Tammy Thomas who worked for 20 years in an auto parts factory in Youngstown, Ohio. The Sun Belt. Tampa is a big piece of the book, and the housing boom and the housing bust, and how that kind of reached its apotheosis in the Tampa area. And then a guy named Dean Price, who really isn't in a part of the country I was looking for, but whose story was so compelling. He's a truck stop entrepreneur in rural North Carolina, son of a Bible Belt preacher in a region that had seen tobacco and textiles that were the king there fail. And he then had a kind of epiphany that led him away from fast food and imported oil and into biodiesel. All of these threads allowed me to get at the bigger history without having to take it head on. And instead, as you read the book, you move between the lives of these characters and the places, and you also meet some famous Americans. And it's done in a more polyphonous way, with a lot of voices. Not my voice. There's no first person. So the burden of having to guide the reader through all that history is off. Instead, I'm the vehicle through which the reader meets people whose stories do the hard work of fleshing out the history.
Did you have a model for this? I mean, it almost sounds like John Dos Passos or something.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a model for a long time. I had a lot of material with no plan, which becomes a frightening state of affairs, especially as the deadline approaches. I had talked to my wife about wanting to do something new, something that nonfiction writing had not done, and it was a break in a way from my work at the New Yorker and from other books I'd written that use the first person and that are slightly more conventional in their narrative form. Finally, there was USA, which is a trilogy I've always loved, and with a sort of apparatus to be adapted, this from characters to famous people to montages of language from different moments in the history I'm telling. It seemed like a wonderful tool to adapt to my purposes, and it also gives it, it gets away from the need to write another policy book or another prescriptive book. This book does not have prescriptions. It is a literary book with an implied argument that the reader can then wrestle with in his or her way.
Mm-hmm. So you go almost back 100 years for a model that helped you organize the material.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you certainly were aware of the trends in fiction and nonfiction and how there's this ever more close blending between the two and confusion among them, and even some writers and scholars saying that there's no such thing as fiction, it's all nonfiction.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa, exactly.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that thinking.
I'm not either.
I'm a believer in the Chinese wall between the two, in the sense that if, yes, all memory is a form of reconstruction, but if you invent something and don't know it's invented, then you're psychopathological. So it's actually a form of insanity to blur the line where you can no longer find it. We know a fact from an invention, and my book is all fact. It is all fact checked, and that's kind of the ground level. Nothing can get in it that doesn't have that. And facts are wonderful things. Why rearrange them in a way that departs from the way they are? All you need to do is go out and look, and you find the raw material that any writer would kill for. The challenge is in the assembly of it. But this is a work of nonfiction, but it's a work of innovative nonfiction in its structure, in its form, in its voice. I would point to a book by a colleague of mine, Catherine Bu, which came out a year ago, and which also won the National Book Award, Behind the Beautiful Forevers, where she, using amazing techniques of video and tape recording as well as more traditional, she got so close to the people in this Indian slum, the slum near Mumbai, that it gives you the full pleasures and feeling of a novel, except that too has to.
I understand it got to the point where they just kind of forgot that she was there.
Amazingly enough, given that she's a blonde Westerner who doesn't speak a word of their language and who's recording people and then going back with a translator and listening to the recording, as far as I understand her method, and then coming back to the subject and asking them, what were you feeling at this moment? What were you thinking when you were walking down that road? And how, it's a very different way into it from a fiction writer, but the result, it has some obvious similarities.
Yes, well, I'm so, as an old newspaperman, I'm so happy to hear your Chinese wall and your reverence for fact and reporting, oh my God.
Absolutely.
But your book does have literary pleasures, and that's one reason it won the National Book Award.
I hope so. I mean, I wanted it to have that, because we have a lot of books about inequality. We have a lot of books about wage stagnation, the decline of the middle class. I've read them. Some of them are quite good. Some of them were very helpful to me. In a way, there's no breakthrough here in political or economic analysis. What's new, I think, about The Unwinding is the form and the experience it gives the reader. I didn't want readers to receive it through their brain and to either argue against it and dismiss it or accept it as true and dismiss it. I wanted them to feel it in their nervous system. This is what America is like today. This is how it's been for a generation. This is what people's lives are like. This is the amount of tension and anxiety and atomization, and this is what it does to families and to communities.
Briefly, because we're almost out of time, what was the biggest thing that you found wrong with America, and what was the biggest thing to be optimistic about?
I think the biggest problem I see is we have come to accept, Tolstoy said there's no state of affairs that man cannot accommodate himself to, no level of injustice that we can't begin to accept as being normal. And that's what I keep coming back to. We've accepted as normal a state of affairs where a father of two can't feed his family even though he's willing to work. I mean, that's true of a family in Tampa who were in the book. And a state of affairs that's normal, where productivity doesn't create wealth for the people who are being more productive. It seems to keep, there's like a reverse gravity. It just keeps flowing to the top. And we don't have a big idea or the will to, maybe we don't need an idea, maybe we just need the will to start to reverse this, and it doesn't seem to be there at the key levels of power. The best thing is that these people I wrote about haven't given up by any means. They are incredibly resourceful. There's a spark of American imagination in them. Like they don't think that the future's over. That's something maybe that pundits are comfortable enough to be able to think. But these people are fighting it, living it. They can't give up. They have children. They have livelihoods. And Dean Price, Tammy Thomas, and the other characters are amazingly, creative people. And we don't see big currents of change, but what I see are lots of little lights shining out.
Great, great. George Packer, his book is The Unwinding, An Inner History of the New America. Again, congratulations on the National Book Award, and thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.